Feedback. One of the most fascinating things about people is how strongly we cling to the story we tell ourselves about who we are, especially when that story gets challenged. Feedback. That's where this idea of the good guy identity comes in. When a man cheats, you'd think it would shatter that self-image. You'd think he'd look in the mirror and go, feedback. What have I done? Who am I really? But more often than not, that's not what happens. Instead, he gets to work trying to make sure the image stays intact, the model feedback, convincing himself and sometimes everyone around him that he's still a good man, just one who made a mistake. The truth is most men who cheat don't see themselves as villains. Feedback. They don't sit in the aftermath thinking, I'm the bad guy here. What they do is something far more subtle, feedback, and arguably more dangerous. They tell themselves of a story that lets them off the hook, just enough to keep living with themselves. Feedback. Because here's what's really happening underneath. We all build an identity over time through the things we do, the relationships we have, the ways we show up for people. And for many men, that identity includes being a nice guy, a faithful partner, a respectful man, a good boyfriend, or even just one of the better ones. So when he cheats, feedback, it doesn't affect his partner's trust. It threatens his whole self-concept. That's scary. It's deeply uncomfortable. And most people don't want to sit in that discomfort for long. Instead of facing it head on, he starts cherry-picking his resume of decency. Feedback. But I've always treated her well. I'm not the kind of guy who sleeps around. I've always supported her dreams. I love her. I've always loved her. He starts building a case for why. Feedback. Even though he did a very not good thing, he's still at his core a good guy. He puts all his energy into keeping that identity propped up, because if he doesn't, what does that say about him? This is where the internal lawyer shows up. You know, the one arguing your case in the court of your own conscience. He's pulling exhibits from the past. Feedback. The times he was faithful, the sacrifices he made, the little things he did right. He's not doing this because he doesn't think it was wrong. He knows it was. Feedback. But he's trying to make the wrong you fit inside a box that still has a good guy label on it. It's cognitive dissonance, and he's trying to resolve it in the way that preserves his pride. Feedback. He might actually believe this version of events. He might be lying to you. He might just be lying to himself because it's easier to say, I slipped up, than it is to admit. Feedback. I acted in a way that deeply violated the trust of someone I say I love. It's easier to hold on to the illusion of being a good man than to face the very real possibility that his actions might suggest otherwise. Feedback. And it's not just about protecting his image or eyes. It's about protecting it in his ego own. The idea of being the bad guy, even temporarily. Feedback is something we don't teach men how to deal with. We don't teach emotional riskability with the same intensity that we teach confidence or leadership or ambition. Feedback. So when that moment comes, when he's staring down the reality of what he's done, he reaches for whatever tools he has. And the easiest tool, the one society so often hands men, feedback, is the story that says, as long as you meant well, you're still good. But meaning well doesn't erase harm. Intentions don't erase consequences. And someone who causes deep emotional pain can still be charming, supportive, and even loving in other areas. That's what makes this so confusing. Feedback. It's what makes people second guess themselves after being hurt by someone who says all the right things. Because if he's a good guy, then what does that make you for feeling angry, betrayed, unsafe? This isn't about demonizing anyone. It's about recognizing the full picture. Man can have moments of kindness, can love you in his way. Feedback. And still make choices that betray that love. And if he doesn't take the time to really look at that contradiction, to wrestle with it, feedback, to own it, then he'll keep hiding behind this mask of goodness. He'll keep telling himself that one action doesn't define him. Feedback. Even if he's never actually done the hard work to repair the damage it caused. And that's the difference. A truly good man doesn't just assume he's good because of he thinks he is. Feedback. He proves it by how he responds when he's done harm. Not by rushing to preserve his image, but by being willing to take it apart, piece by piece. Feedback. Because character isn't built in the moments where it's easy to look good. It's built in the moments where you've fallen short. And how you choose to show up afterward. Feedback. We all want to believe we're rational, that our choices, even the questionable ones, are somehow justifiable if you dig deep enough. Feedback. And when someone cheats, especially someone who still wants to hold on to the belief that they're a decent person, they often go on this internal mission to explain a why. Feedback, not just to the person they hurt, but to themselves. Because if they can attach a reason to it, then maybe it wasn't as bad as it looks. Maybe under the right emotional lighting, it wasn't betrayal. It was confusion, or a cry for help, or just a moment of weakness that anyone could have had. That's the thing about emotional rationalization. Feedback. It's not about finding the truth. It's about finding a story that feels easy to live with. A story that softens the blow of reality. And for the guy who cheated, the story usually sounds something like, I wasn't being fulfilled. Or we were already drifting apart, or I didn't feel seen anymore. Those statements might even have some truth to them, but they're used in the wrong direction. Feedback. Instead of being reasons to have a difficult conversation or seek help, they become retracted permission slips for crossing a line. So he tells himself, I didn't cheat because I'm selfish. Feedback. I cheated because I was hurting. And that might feel like an honest reflection, but more often it's a subtle dodge. It makes the cheating about what was E missing, not what he A chose. Feedback. And that's an important distinction, because pain or frustration in a relationship doesn't remove accountability for the action someone takes in response to that pain. You can feel neglected, you can feel lonely, but those feelings don't cause betrayal, choices do. Still, that emotional story is powerful, especially when it makes him feel like the victim in his own narrative. Feedback. I didn't go looking for anything. It just happened. That's a classic line. It sounds harmless enough, but what it does is minimize the number of small feedback, deliberate decisions it actually takes to cheat. It wasn't one moment, it was many moments, text sent, boundaries blurred, intentions ignored. Feedback. But when someone wants to believe they're still a good person, they compress all of that into a single regrettable event, as if it came out of nowhere, as if they weren't steering the ship the whole time. And there's often a sense of, if you really understood how I felt, feedback, you'd see why I did it. That's the unspoken plea underneath the justification, and it can be incredibly manipulative, not always intentionally. Feedback, but still manipulative, because it subtly shifts the focus away from what he did and toward what you didn't do. Suddenly, feedback. It's not just about his lack of integrity. It's about your lack of attention, your distance, your perceived shortcomings. And now, instead of confronting the betrayal, feedback, you're being nudged to examine your own role in it. That's an all rationalization at work. It reframes wrongdoing as a side effect of emotional neglect. Feedback. And it can make the person who was cheated on question their own reality. Was I too closed off? Did I stop making him feel appreciated? Was I part of the problem? Those are natural questions. Feedback. They can become dangerous when used to excuse someone else's breach of trust. Because no matter what was going on in the relationship, there's always another choice besides betrayal. Always feedback. But the story, the rationalization, doesn't make room for that. It says, shield, I was in pain, and that pain explains everything. And look, we're all human. Feedback. We all look for ways to understand our own actions, but understanding why you felt tempted is not the same as excusing what you did with that temptation. And too many people stop at the first part. Feedback, they get to the emotional reason and decide that's enough. That's where the work ends, when in reality, that's where it should begin. Feedback. Because the real test of character isn't whether someone can identify their emotional wounds, it's whether they can take responsibility for how they respond to those wounds. If he was hurting, feedback. If he was feeling unseen or unappreciated, did he talk? Did he seek help? Did he communicate honestly? Or did he go looking for relief in a place that would hurt you the most? Feedback. The hard truth is emotional struggles don't absolve betrayal. They can explain the A context, sure, but they don't undo the harm, and they don't make someone a victim of their own decisions. Feedback. It's not enough to say, I felt disconnected, so I made a mistake, because a mistake is something you trip over. Cheating is something you walk toward, often step by step. Feedback. And the moment someone starts painting that journey as something that just you happened to them, they're not being honest. Not with you. Not with themselves. Feedback. Because cheating isn't something you fall into. It's something you allow through rationalization, justifications, and emotional narratives that sound soft but carry sharp edges. So if he's telling himself and telling you that it wasn't really him, that it was the circumstances, the emotions, the timing, just remember, feedback. The most dangerous lies are ones we believe protect the parts of ourselves we're not ready to face. Feedback. One of the most fascinating things about human psychology is how good we are at separating things in our minds that should logically be connected. We can file away certain behaviors in one drawer, feedback, and our self-image in another, as if they have nothing to do with each other. That's what happens when someone cheats and still thinks of themselves as a good guy. He compartmentalizes feedback. He takes that betrayal and tucks it into a Manx label box, temporary lapse, while keeping his core identity as loyal, loving, and morally upright completely untouched. Feedback. It's a kind of mental gymnastics. Subtle, often unconscious, but incredibly effective in preserving how he wants to see himself. And here's how it usually works. When he looks in the mirror, he doesn't see a cheater. He sees a man who made a mistake, a man who is under stress, a man who is going through something, but not a man who is disloyal or who's capable of real betrayal. Feedback. That's an important distinction, because he let himself believe that the person who cheated is actually him. Then you have to rethink everything, his values, his choices. Feedback, maybe even his entire self-image. And that kind of reckoning, it's uncomfortable, it's painful. So instead, he creates this little psychological distance between himself and the act. The cheating becomes an exception, not part of his character. That wasn't me, he might say, or that wasn't the real me. But who was it then? That's the uncomfortable question. Feedback, because it wasn't him then who made the decisions, who sent the messages, who crossed the lines, who lied, who betrayed trust. Back. This is where you start to see the limits of that, not the real me excuse. Because the truth is the version of him that cheated is still Lou him. It might be a part he doesn't like. Feedback, a part he doesn't want to look at too closely, but it's still there. And until he owns that, really owns it, there's no real growth. Feedback. There's just a carefully constructed version of himself that gets to live on unchallenged. This kind of compartmentalization isn't always malicious. Feedback. It's often something people do just to cope. We all want to believe we're good. We want to believe that even when we mess up, we're still worthy of love, respect, and forgiveness. Feedback. And that's not inherently wrong, but it becomes a problem when someone uses that belief to avoid responsibility. Model feedback. When they lean so hard into the narrative of, I'm still a good person, that they never stop to examine what their actions say about them. Feedback. Because here's the truth. Most people don't want actions. Your action dogs say something about you. They're not the only thing that defines you, but they are part of the story. Feedback. And when someone chooses to ignore that part, when they act like their worst moment was just a blip on an otherwise perfect record, they're not being honest. Feedback. They're in their own character in real time to avoid discomfort. Feedback. And what's even more dangerous is that this kind of mental separation allows him to keep doing harm without fully recognizing it. If he sees the cheating as a one-time anomaly, feedback, something that happened in a vacuum, then he doesn't have to examine the behaviors and thought patterns that led up to it. He doesn't have to ask himself, feedback, what kind of partner was I being in the weeks or months before that happened? He doesn't have to wonder, what needs was I ignoring in myself? Feedback. And why didn't I bring them to the surface before betraying someone I care about? He just chalks it up to a mistake, moves on, feedback, and continues living in this neat little box where he's the good guy who slipped. But cheating isn't just a slip. It's not a stumble you recover from without reflection. Feedback. It's a decision or a series of decisions that have real consequences. And if he doesn't take the time to connect those decisions to the kind of person he actually wants to be, feedback, he'll keep carrying around this fragmented version of himself. One where the actions and the identity don't line up. One where he's always saying, feedback. That's not who I am. Instead of asking, why did I do something so out of line with who I want to be? And look, I get it. Feedback. It's painful to reconcile the idea that we're capable of hurting someone we love, that we can act in ways that are selfish, deceitful, even cruel. Feedback. It's easier to keep those things in a separate room, locked away, out of sight. But the danger of doing that is that we never grow, we never change. We just maintain the illusion. Feedback. True accountability means being willing to open that locked door, to say, yes, that it was me, and now I need to face it. That's not weakness. That's strength. Feedback. That's what integrity actually looks like. Not the absence of failure, but the willingness to own it fully and without excuses. Because you don't get to be a good guy by declaring it. Feedback. You earn it in how you handle your worst moment. Feedback. Something interesting happens when people get caught doing something they know is wrong. They start looking around for someone worse. It's a natural reflex. We compare. We rank. Feedback. We look for ways to minimize our own guilt by measuring it against someone else's behavior. Back. And when a man cheats but still wants to think of himself as a good guy, one of the quickest ways he justifies it is by saying, well, feedback. At least I'm not like those guys. You've heard the type sing feedback. I didn't sleep with dozens of women. It was just one time. I didn't emotionally manipulate her for months. Told her eventually. I didn't lie forever. These comparisons are subtle but powerful. Back. He positions himself next to a villain in his mind. Maybe someone who cheated repeatedly, who had a secret second life, or who was cruel or abusive. And suddenly he feels like the lesser evil. Feedback, as if that somehow makes him decent. But just because there are worse things you could have done doesn't mean what you did wasn't wrong. It doesn't erase the betrayal. Feedback. It doesn't undo the hurt. And yet that's what comparison offers, a way to shrink the size of his actions in the context of someone else's. And the moment he says, feedback, it could have been worse, he's no longer sitting in the truth of what I was. He's creating distance from it. Feedback. And this mindset isn't just about deflecting judgment from others. It's about protecting his own ego. If he can convince himself that he's not the worst person in the room, feedback, then maybe he's still salvageable. Maybe he's still worthy of forgiveness without actually having to earn it. That's the comfort comparison brings. Feedback. Because when you're not the bad guy, you get to keep the good guy label, even if your actions suggest otherwise. But morality isn't a race to the bottom. Feedback. It's not about finding someone worse so you can justify where you are. It's about whether you lived up to your own values, your own integrity, your own standards in that moment. Feedback. And when someone cheats, they don't get to measure their decency against people who've done more damage. That's not growth. That's self-preservation. I've seen guys say things like feedback. I didn't plan it. It just happened. Some men go out looking for it. I didn't. And that's meant to make them seem better by comparison. But let's really look at that for a second. Feedback. Does the lack of premeditation somehow make the betrayal easier to digest? Does the fact that it was impulsive mean it didn't hurt just as deeply? Or cause the same loss of trust? Back, the answer's no. But by bringing in the idea of someone worse, feedback, he finds a way to downgrade his actions from terrible to unfortunate, from selfish to understandable. It's the same logic that says, back, at least I was honest afterward. As if telling the truth after breaking it somehow reestablishes trust. It doesn't, not without real accountability, feedback, and not without a willingness to sit in the discomfort of what he did and stop looking for other people to blame or other people to be worse, feedback. The irony here is that these comparisons stall the healing process. They make it harder for the person who was hurt to feel seen, because now instead of their pain being acknowledged, feedback, it's being measured against what ye could have been. And suddenly the conversation isn't about their betrayal anymore. It's about his reputation, his need to still be viewed in a certain way, feedback. That's the danger of this kind of thinking. It becomes performative. He's not trying to understand the harm he caused. He's trying to minimize it. He's focused on preserving his self-image, feedback, not repairing the damage. And while he's busy comparing himself to men who cheated more, lied more, hurt more, he's missing the point. He still made a choice that broke trust, feedback. And that's not nothing. There's also this unspoken belief woven into the comparisons. Because I'm not as bad as them, feedback. I don't deserve the full consequences. That's the real motivation sometimes. The idea that if he can prove he's better than the worst case scenario, back, then maybe he shouldn't lose the relationship. Maybe he shouldn't have to face the full weight of the fallout. But relationships don't operate on that curve. They operate on trust, back. And when that trust is broken, it doesn't matter how mild. The betrayal was in comparison to someone else's. It still hurts. It still shifts everything, feedback. He wants to be judged on a sliding scale, but the truth is integrity doesn't work like that. You don't get to keep your badge of honor just because someone else committed a bigger offense. Feedback. You either act in alignment with your values or you don't. And when you don't, the work isn't to point at others, it's to point inward. So if he's still telling himself, model feedback, I'm not like those other guys, what he's really saying is, I need a reason to believe I'm still good, feedback, without having to fully change. But being better than the worst doesn't make you good. It just makes you harder to spot. Feedback. There's something really important to stand about why someone can do something as damaging as cheating and still hold the idea that they're a good person. It's because they don't fully connect with the real impact of what they've done. Feedback. They feel guilty. They feel bad about it. But the pain they experience is often focused inwarding on what they've lost, how they look, how much they hate what they did. Feedback. And while that might sound like remorse, there's a big difference between feeling bad about your actions and truly empathizing with the person you hurt, because guilt is self-centered. Feedback. It's about you. It's about how uncomfortable you feel sitting with your behavior. Empathy, on the other hand, is outward. It's about stepping into someone else's world. Feedback. It's about imagining what it actually felt like to be on the receiving end of the lie, of the silence, of the betrayal. And the truth is, many people who cheat never really go that far. Feedback. Not because they're heartless, but because it's easier not to. When you cheat and then see the person you love break down in front of you, there's a part of you that wants to shut it off. Feedback. Not out of cruelty, because fully seeing that pain is overwhelming. It forces you to look at yourself through a lens that you've been trying to avoid. So instead, you keep the focus narrow. Feedback. I didn't mean to hurt you. It was a mistake. I hate myself for doing this. And while all of those might be true, they're not the same as fully owning the impact. Feedback. When someone cheats and still thinks they're a good guy, it's often because they're more connected to their view intention than the effect. I didn't cheat to hurt her. Feedback. I didn't cheat because I stopped loving her. I cheated because I was lost, confused, whatever. That line of thinking makes it easier to still believe you're a decent person. Feedback, because you're not focusing on the devastation you caused. You're focusing on the reasons you feel you ended up there. But healing doesn't happen in the land of intentions. It happens when you're brave enough to walk through the aftermath you created. When you sit with the fact that your actions didn't just break the rules, they broke trust. Feedback. They shook someone's sense of safety. They made someone question whether they were ever truly loved or if any of it was real. And until you allow yourself to, you really feel the weight of that feedback, you're not taking full responsibility. And here's the part that's hard to hear. Some people, they've taken responsibility just because they admitted the truth. I confessed feedback, didn't I? I'm being honest now, aren't I? But responsibility isn't telling the truth. It's a staying with the truth long enough to understand what it did to the other person. It's not just back. I'm sorry, and expecting that to be enough. It's realizing that the apology isn't the end of the process. It's the beginning. Too often, Feedback. The guy who cheats and still believes he's good is measuring his character by how bad he feels, not by how much he understands the depth of the harm. He might cry. Feedback. He might say all the right things, but then he becomes impatient when forgiveness doesn't come quickly. He gets frustrated when the other person is still hurting, still questioning, still angry. Feedback. Why? Because E's ready to move on. He's done the guilt part. He wants the next chapter. But empathy doesn't have a timeline. Feedback. And healing, real healing, only happens when the person who broke the trust is willing to sit in the fire they started without rushing to put it out. And sometimes that means just listening. Feedback. Without defending, without erecting it, making about much you how hate yourself or how you're not that kind of person. It means being able to hear someone say, feedback, you destroyed something in me, and not trying to clean it up with, but I still love you. Because if you really did feedback, then the loving thing to do would be to hold space for that destruction, to understand that when you cheat, you don't just hurt someone, you change them. Feedback, and not always in ways that can be undone. And yet, the belief that you're still a good guy helps you avoid all that. It keeps you at arm's length from the pain. Model feedback. It lets you mourn what you lost instead of what you took from someone else. But if you want integrity, real integrity, you can't just feel bad. Feedback. You have to get close enough to the pain to understand how deep it went. Feedback. Because only when you truly grasp the effect of what you did can you begin to change the parts of yourself that allowed it in the first place. Feedback. And only then can you stop hiding the guilt and start stepping into real growth. Feedback. One of the biggest reasons a guy can cheat and still believe he's a good guy is because he separates morality from behavior. He thinks goodness is something you carry in spite of what you do. Feedback. Not something you have to earn through consistent actions. It's this flawed idea that being a good person is an identity rather than a practice. Feedback. Like it's some innate quality you're either born with or not. So when he cheats, instead of seeing it as a reflection of his character in that moment, he sees it as a contradiction to it. Feedback. And that's where the whole narrative starts to unravel. He tells himself, I'm a good guy who did a bad thing. And on the surface, that might seem like accountability. Feedback. But dig a little deeper and it becomes clear that it's really a way to protect his self-image. Because the moment he says feedback, I'm not a bad person, he starts trying to find ways to preserve that label, ways that don't require deep change. He clings to the idea that he's kind, loving, generous, funny, feedback, or emotionally available you most of the time. So how could this one act, this betrayal, suddenly make him not good? Feedback. What he doesn't realize is that being a good person isn't a blanket that covers you when you mess up. It's not something you get to hide behind. It's a responsibility. Feedback. And when your actions contradict that responsibility, your job isn't to defend your identity, it's to rebuild it. But rebuilding requires honesty. Brutal, uncomfortable honesty. Feedback. And that's hard because it means facing the fact that for a moment or for many moments, you were willing to put your own needs above someone else's trust. Feedback. That you made a choice that didn't align with who you say you are. And when there's a gap between your words and your actions, feedback. The only thing that matters is whether you're willing to close that gap. That's the difference between a man who wants to change and a man who wants to be seen as someone who's changed. Feedback. The fern is willing to go through a hard, unglamorous process of self-reflection. He'll ask himself questions he doesn't want to hear the answers to. He'll look for patterns. Feedback. He'll take responsibility without needing praise for doing so. He won't weaponize his guilt or ask for sympathy. He'll just do the work. The second one, he'll clean up his image. Feedback. He'll say all the right things to make sure you know he feels bad. He'll tell you he's learned his lesson. But beneath it all, feedback. He's more interested in reclaiming the title of good guy than he is in understanding what caused the rupture in the first place. And that's the guy who's more likely to do it again. Feedback. Not because he's evil, but because he hasn't changed. He's just repainted the surface. To truly grow, he has to accept that being a good person isn't about I wanting to be one. Feedback. It's about showing up every single day and making choices that reflect that. And that includes the moments no one sees, the texts you choose not to reply to, the late night thoughts you challenge. Feedback. The conversations you decide to have, even when they're uncomfortable, that's what integrity looks like. Not some polished version of yourself you hold up after a mistake, but the small feedback, everyday decisions that prevent that mistake in the first place. We all want to be seen as good, but the need to be seen that way can actually block us from becoming it. Feedback. Because if your identity is tied to being a good guy, you'll avoid anything that threatens that image, including the truth. And ironically, feedback. It's only when you're willing to let that image break apart that you can start becoming truly trustworthy. Someone who doesn't just look good from the outside, feedback, but lives with intention and self-awareness on the inside. So if a man cheats and still insists he's a good guy, the real question isn't, is he good? The real question is feedback. Is he willing to become someone better than a version of himself who made that choice? Is he willing to let go of the label enough to earn something more meaningful? Self-respect built on real change? Feedback, not just reputation, because being a good guy isn't about how you explain your mistakes. It's about how you prevent them from becoming patterns.